Midway through the 20th century, two unusual new molecules, organic compounds with a striking family resemblance, exploded upon the West. In time, they would change the course of social, political, and cultural history, as well as the personal histories of the millions of people who would eventually introduce them to their brains. As it happened, the arrival of these disruptive chemistries coincided with another world historical explosion, that of the atomic bomb. There were people who compared the two events and made much of the cosmic synchronicity. Extraordinary new energies had been loosed upon the world. Things would never be quite the same. And indeed, things were never quite the same after that. The thing is, psychedelics are compounds that change your perception of the world, normally called hallucinations. How did they change the world? One of these discoveries we know about, the atomic bomb. It changed the course of humanity. It changed the way we looked at wars. But the other discovery, it's either a part of obscure drug culture or just limited to the world of people who are interested in pharmacology or interested in understanding and exploring more about mental health issues. If we go out today and ask anybody on the street, what are the important things that happened in late 1930s, early 1940s? Most people will answer with World War II. Not many will say that, oh, it was the beginning of psychedelic era, discovery of acid, discovery of hallucinations as we know it today. So why does Michael Pollan even call it one of the two most important discoveries of 20th century? Because it was the discovery of LSD, the synthesis of LSD, which we popularly call acid, in 1938 by Albert Hofmann, that changed the course of neuropsychiatry and the way we would look at mental health disorders and try to treat them, try to answer questions that we did not even know we could ask. So when we, as humans, we had these two discoveries in the palm of our hands, when humanity was at crossroads of taking one of these two roads, one that led us to magic mushroom, but the other one that led us to a mushroom cloud. Why was it that we could not take the road that could have changed how we looked at mental health, how we understood about mental disorders, the possible treatments for it? Why was it like that? Because honestly, right now, we are going through mental health crisis. The entire world is going through mental health crisis. This 10.7% share of global population that is going through any mental health disorder at any point of time right now. As of 2017, there was a 13% rise in mental health issues and substance use disorders, as WHO told, which has been amplified by at least 20 to 25% in the pandemic. And that's not a small number, right? So why was this road not taken? Why could we not take this road? What went wrong? In 1938, when LSD was discovered, was synthesized by Albert Hofmann, that was not what he was looking for. That was not what he was working for. He was trying to produce a drug that could help better with blood circulation, stimulate blood circulation and respiration. It was 5 years later, LSD 25, which was shelved, it was 5 years later that he accidentally ingested some of it. And what happened was, I think probably the only innocent encounter with LSD devoid of any expectation, the first trip anybody ever had on acid. And that was wartime, it was 1943. So vehicles were banned. So he took his cycle back home. So the first trip on LSD was while riding a bicycle home. And it happened on 19th April, 1943. Why do we know this date? Because every year, this day is celebrated as Bicycle Day to commemorate this landmark event. It's 3 days from now, by the way, it's 16th April. So this happened, and this was a huge discovery. Albert Hofmann, 20 years after the synthesis of LSD, also made another compound. He extracted the active component of magic mushroom called psilocin or psilocybin. Okay. And this one person, Dr. Hofmann, was responsible for giving the entire world two of the psychedelics that are most used right now in psychedelic research for mental health disorders. Now, why was this road not taken? Because neuroscientists, they were really excited about this discovery, about the discovery of psychedelics. They were experimenting, they were trying to know what all can they do. And psychedelics is a word from its Greek roots, means mind manifesting, psychedelics. So while the scientific world was working on that, there were experiments going on, there were things going on. Its power was being tested in realms that were unregulated. It seeped down to the masses really quickly, and the unsolicited, unwise use of these drugs led the government, the UN, to ban these drugs, to criminalize them, to schedule them, and they were made highly inaccessible. So in 1970, US government was the first one to impose ban. So because of that, even the scientific research, it went underground. All the promises that psychedelics were showing, the studies were showing, they all went underground for the longest time. And it was years and years of effort, and it was multiple years of work that built the evidence with which we could eventually plead the government to understand that they do have potential, and in a controlled, sustained way, if you're able to work on them and understand them better, maybe it'll be a better thing for mental health crisis right now. And even as latest as 15th century AD, in the Mayan and Aztec tribes, you can see temple murals, you can see stone carvings of mushrooms, which clearly show that these psychedelics have been used in cultural and traditional practices for years. And actually in Aztec and Mayan civilization, there's a language, there's a word for magic mushrooms, which is called Teonanacatl, which means flesh of the gods. There are many anecdotal references about people's experience with psychedelics, but I will bring talk back to its scientific aspect. So in 1897, it was the first thing that happened, the extraction of mescaline from peyote cactus. Peyote cactus is also known for its psychedelic power, and it's used by indigenous tribes of the Americas for their cultural and traditional practices. Then came LSD, psilocybin, and other psychostimulants like MDMA, and all they start getting added to the list. 1970s became a bottleneck because of the ban. But with years of efforts of like Roland Griffiths, Rick Doblin, these giants, just to name a few of them, that it has become increasingly, even if slowly and steadily, but increasingly easier to work on these drugs all over again, to bring them back in light. So the clinical studies, the field has been doing a lot of clinical studies for years, back from 1940s and 50s. These are just very few examples of the number of studies that have happened. And all of these studies, they clearly show that in patients with treatment-resistant depression, in addiction, in substance use disorders, these drugs have been helpful. But one of the most interesting and striking studies is that patients who are terminally ill or advanced stage cancer, in those patients, negative emotions of anxiety and depression that are usually associated with the illness, they have been able to alleviate the negative symptoms of end-of-life journey. So this is a part that has been done since 1960s. It's an ongoing effort. It's been happening for a long time. I am doing my PhD in the world of psychedelics, as a preclinical researcher. One of the interesting things, before I go there, is that the default mode network in the brain is a network in the brain that is usually active when you are not active. You're not active as in like when you're thinking, you're worrying. The entire ruminative process, which is usually associated with depression, and the entire loop that is associated with, say, sometimes obsessive compulsive disorders, substance abuse disorders. So this network is inactivated under the influence of psychedelics, as a few studies from Johns Hopkins has shown. Independently, interestingly, another group from Yale University also saw that this network is inherently silent in people who are practicing meditators with at least 10,000 hours of practice. So this all is clinical work, and this also gives us an insight about the circuits that might be involved, about how brain perceives psychedelics and how they might be involved in creating entropy, increasing or decreasing in certain parts of the brain, which also helps us to understand how preclinically we can design our experiments and try to understand what these psychedelics can do. So preclinically, what I do is I use rodent models to understand what these drugs would be doing on anxiety-like behavior. So what we do is we make conflict anxiety mazes. What is a conflict anxiety maze? Conflict anxiety maze is basically a maze in which you harness the potential of, you harness innate states of animals, okay? One state is they want to keep themselves safe in a new environment, and the other is that they want to explore for the possibility of, say, foraging. So elevated plus maze is an elevated maze. It's a plus-shaped platform with two opposite arms that are closed and two which are open. And if the animal spends more time in the closed arms, the more it wants to keep itself safe. So the more anxious it is, and the more it goes in the open arms, the less anxious it is, because it's open to exploring risky novel areas. So using that model, I gave animals psychedelics, and one psychedelic in particular which acts on the serotonergic system. To put it loosely, serotonin is the happy molecule. It is responsible for your happiness. So obviously then it's involved in anxiety and despair-like behavior also. So using that, this psychedelic, which is called DOI, we saw that animals show decreased anxiety-like response. They spend way more time in open arms. And what we see is that it happens via the hippocampus. Okay, so this is how a rodent brain looks like, and the purple thing is the hippocampus. Now, hippocampus is a very interesting structure. It is involved in making memories, in reading maps, and also in modulating all your behaviors, especially mood-related behaviors. So what I see in my work is that psychedelics act on this area in a set of neurons which inactivate the hippocampus. So when the activity is shut down in this circuit is probably what is causing the decreased anxiety-like response in the animals. Now this work is one of the small parts of a global effort that is happening in order to understand what psychedelics can do, in order to understand how they can be implicated in mood-related response, in behaviors of anxiety and depression, and substance use disorders and addiction. But we have our own challenges associated with it. We have just scratched the surface of this field, which holds so much of promise and so much of therapeutic potential. And we have no idea even what all questions we can ask. But the hope is that one day we'll be able to ask all the questions that will allow us to look at these substances as what they can provide in terms of a better life, a better mental health situation for the world, And the hope is that we are able to harness its potential in all its imperfect glory. And the hope is that we don't miss the turn this time, and we do take the road that was long overdue.